channel, which is a new thing, right? We're excited. We're excited to have participation in so many different ways. And when I came up with this talk title a month or so ago, Free to Be You and Me, it seemed like I'd heard that before. But I didn't know. It was just this thing in my head. So I went looking, of course, and it's not only the title of a song. It was also a TV show. Marlo Thomas, back in 1974, you know, Dark Ages, way back then. And that was the theme song. Some of you might remember this, and some of you might be like me going, it's kind of sort of vaguely familiar. But back in 1974, that was a totally visionary idea. Is it possible for every single being to be free to be who they were? Period, no exceptions. Some would say we're still challenged with that, and I think probably I would agree. But my question today is, what's in our way? What's in the way of us being free? Some people would say that's a trick question too. So I'm going to reread the quote that Sharon read a few minutes ago, but I'm going to back up first to page 115 in Dr. Holmes's New Design for Living to get a head start, because you know how we have to build to these things. And what he wrote on page 115, for too long we have been discussing what it is that we don't want. So let us turn our attention to how we can bring more of what we do want into our experience. But in doing so, we need to remind and forewarn ourselves that we are not dealing with some system of thought or way of thinking whereby we may get something for nothing, or experience outward conditions which may be entirely different from our inward state of consciousness. Here's the kicker. Life is lived from the inside out. So we have to see that life that we wish to have on the inside of our heads before it can show up in our world. This is a basic premise of our teaching. And, you know, we have to do stuff sometimes. Think about this for yourself. If I had wanted to win the $1 billion lotto that happened on Friday, I had to buy a ticket. And if I didn't buy a ticket, there wasn't any way I was going to win. I have to decide it, I have to see it, and then I have to act. There's an old joke about a man who was talking to his definition of the deity. And he asked how come he hadn't won the lottery yet. And his deity said, please help me by buying a ticket. We experience life as we are, not as we wish we are, not as we hope we are, not as we... It's got to be from the inside out. And the great news is absolutely everything can be changed. Everything. In fact, we couldn't stop change if we wanted. Sometimes that's not so good, right? Because change happens. But how do we live if we and our thoughts about our lives are the primary things in the way of our own personal experience of success or freedom or joy or love or whatever it is we want? I mean, that's where the first roadblock is, that little space behind our eyes. And that doesn't mean the experiences are imaginary, right? They're not illusions. They're happening. The stuff that happens is happening. And yet, what is creating those experiences, or the way we experience those things that happen, is our thinking. So we have to be in charge of our own minds in order to have a different viewpoint. And we all know people that have achieved amazing, remarkable, incredible accomplishments, even though every single card was stacked against them. And we also all know people who have been completely crushed by the first thing that went wrong. What's different? What's different in those experiences? Sometimes usually there's some kind of some belief that that person who succeeds has, that they can, or some person that helped them remember that they can. And that actually isn't a unique thing. It's in every single one of us. And we have to find that. We have to find that place in us that says, okay, that wasn't fun, so now let's try again. And step forward and move into that direction we choose to go. So back to Dr. Holmes' New Design for Living. Life is lived from the inside out and not from without in. Regardless of how much conditions may seem to bear down on us, how impregnable they may seem to be, how impossible it may seem to change them, we must always keep foremost in our mind that they are only effects, results of unseen causes, and the action of the law. There's our friend, the law. What's the law? It's done unto you as you believe. Boy, that sucks sometimes. What's great about that, though? If it's done to me as I believe, if I believe it's possible, then it's possible. If I believe it can't happen, well, then guess what? It can't happen. We're always free to change our minds. We're always free to adjust our beliefs and adapt our way of seeing in the world so that we move from gross negativity to something that is positive and supportive and uplifting in our worlds. And if suddenly in your head you hear all this chorus of, yeah, but I can't, you need to check that voice and tell it that it isn't in charge of you. Because it's going to scream. It's going to try to say, you can't because you're not fill in the blank enough. And that's a story we have in our heads that was implanted by somebody who was afraid for us when we were small. They were afraid we would step out and we would have an adventure that they didn't know what to do with. And so he said, no, be small and insignificant, that way you'll be safe. And yet that's not the truth of who we are. We get to be free when we decide to be free. We get to be ourselves when we decide to be ourselves. We get to explore and express ourselves when we decide to do exactly that. Now, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, our freedom doesn't extend to making other people behave. Occasionally we might think we like that some, but then again, if we can do that to somebody else, then they can do that to us. That's not okay. So I suppose in a child's fairy tale world, where there was a totally beneficent queen who managed to take everybody's needs and considerations into, the way she thought about running the whole thing, that might be really cool for about a minute. But then, what do we do? I mean, that's not the world we live in, right? Because that beneficent queen is only beneficent as long as you're playing inside her box. And the minute you want to step outside her box, there's a problem. So we get to be our own beneficent queen or king. We get to be our own decider and experiencer and explorer. And, sometimes there are bumps and bounces as we learn what that means for us. A friend of mine who graduated ministerial school with me posted a thing on her Facebook page this week, and I thought it was stunning. She wrote, "Today, 28 years ago, I was officially excommunicated from the LDS Church. My parents joined the Mormon Church when I was 7. I was very active in the church, including young adult leadership, until about 4 years prior to this event. I had come out as a lesbian, And after trying to just accept being alone and celibate in my life, along with the judgment that I was getting from all of its members, including seeking counsel within the church to change me from gay to straight, after feeling so harshly judged and seriously contemplating suicide, I walked away from the church to figure out if there was some other way. 2 years later, I found that staying in the church didn't support my mental health or spiritual progression. I asked that my name be removed from their records. I reclaimed what it meant for me to be a child of God. And then she had an excommunication hearing in 1994. And here's what she said. Standing here, informing you of what I feel about being gay in the church is not going to change anything about the church. I am aware of that. I do not profess to know all the answers, including the most important, the why and how of sexual orientation. And I would think our heavenly parents must see the pain inflicted upon gays and lesbians who, through no fault of their own, must pay such a painful lifelong price because of society's ignorance. This is the part that got me. Joseph Smith once said, "While one portion of the human race is judging and condemning the other without mercy, the great parent of the universe looks upon the whole of the human family with a fatherly care and a paternal regard. He is a wise lawgiver and will judge all men, not according to the narrow, contracted notions of men, but according to the deeds done in the body, whether they're good or evil." And then she said, "My family was counseled by the church to treat me as an apostate and did not speak to me for 18 years. Painful but necessary to detach from such toxicity. I became an advocate and activist for the LGBTQ community and came out in all areas of my life. I explored many spiritual traditions, expanded my education, and found family again, both in my family of origin and, as many of you did, chose a new family. There is a way through. Loving oneself and loving others. It isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, and it lasts a lifetime. I'm grateful for the journey. Today I'm a minister helping others find their way through a power of love. And without that misery and that challenge and that hard time, that rejection by the thing she thought was most important, she wouldn't have discovered who she really was. She wouldn't have discovered her ability to stand and be true to herself and help the people she's been able to help since. And most of us, like my friend Reverend Bobby, who serves a CSL in Southern California, have found CSL or some other New Thought center or church after discovering a lot of places we don't fit. And occasionally, very occasionally, there's a young person who gets the great advantage of growing up in this teaching. But that's still pretty rare. If we think about all those individuals that we each imagine as great leaders or icons, whether they're famous people or just people we know, most of them had to rub against the boundaries of their world in order to experience who they needed, desired, chose to become. And most of us have had, at least at some level, an experience like that, where we had to feel a little trapped, we had to feel a little stuck in order to find a way that was different, a way that worked, a way that let us be free. So, here, back in my boring little life, I had two things happen on Thursday. My garage door quit working, and I got my car picked up a rock off the road and busted the windshield. And I thought, once upon a time, these would have been yucky things that would happen, and I would think, oh my God, what's the third thing going to be? Because bad things always happen in 3. And I thought, I didn't do that. I didn't actually do that this time. That's cool. That's progress. I'm making headway at being undriven by the events that happen in my life. And now the windshield's already fixed. That was just Thursday, and today's Sunday, and it got fixed yesterday. So, wow. And I've got a guy coming to fix the garage door. Wow. So rather than going, oh my God, life is horrible, these terrible things are happening, it's like, yeah, it's a thing. It happened. Okay, fine, whatever. And we get to be in charge of how we view what happens. It sounds like it's easy, right? It's not. But it is a practice, and it's something we can each do. And it's constant. It is a marathon, not a sprint. So returning to Dr. Holmes from the New Design for Living, I'm finally getting around to the section that Sharon read. The starting point for our experience of greater freedom, a greater good, is the emancipation of our own thought. We free our own thought. And as we start to free our thought, we realize that in such degree as we work with the laws of spirit, they serve us. And the rest of that paragraph reads, even bondage itself, any sort of bondage, is but a false use we make of our freedom. So when I find myself with a busted windshield, or I find myself with a garage door not working right, I get to decide what that means. I get to decide how to deal with life. And we're always free. And we get to choose how we want to be, regardless of what's happening to us in our external circumstances. Every single being has stories about how they have felt trapped, or constrained, or limited by events, circumstances, people, situations, or conditions. Nobody is exempt. Everybody's had that experience, and sometimes multiple times a day. And so we all get to change our minds and change our viewpoint of how we see that experience. So I want to close with part of a letter written by Carl Jung back in 1933 to a mysterious Frau V. Your questions are unanswerable because you want to know how one ought to live. One lives as one can. There is no single definitive way for the individual which is prescribed for them or would be the proper one. If that's what you want, you had best join the Catholic Church, because they will tell you what's what. Moreover, this way fits in with the average way of thinking for humankind in general. But if you want to go your own way, it is the way you make for yourself, which is never prescribed, which you do not know in advance, which simply comes into being of itself when you put one foot in front of the other. If you always do the next thing that needs to be done, you will go mostly safely and sure-footedly along the path. It is naturally no help at all to speculate about how you ought to live. But if you do with conviction the next and most necessary thing, you are always doing something meaningful and intended by you. So there we have it. Freedom to be you and me lives in the grasp of each one of us. And we get to decide how to be in the world, how we choose to live, how we choose to show up, how we choose to engage and interact. Do that. Change your mind 100 times a day if that's what it takes. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I'm going to roll straight into the prayer. If I said something useful for you, hold it in your mind while I speak these words. of affirmation. I recognize that one life that I call God, that lives as me and as each beloved. I recognize that divinity that is motivated and powered by love. And it shows up, it expresses as each and every one. And it is broad and wide and deep and tall and encompasses all possibilities. Endless, open, infinite, unimaginable. That great good that lives in, as, and through each one, around and by each one, and for each one. Every single being lives in this goodness and gets to experience and express it as they choose. That's as good as it gets. That one life, that one mind, that one divinity I call God is all there is. And it exists now, here, in each one. So I celebrate the joy, I celebrate the love, I celebrate the peace, the freedom, the harmony, the order. And I know that good and more good is the natural outcome as each one steps into their own freedom. Relaxing into the truth of these words because I know it's not a chore. I let it be, and so it is.